scaling doesn't always mean more profitability. It doesn't always mean that you have the schedule that you want. Oftentimes you don't have the schedule you want. How do you balance your profit potential versus your purpose? Welcome to the Generations of Wealth podcast. I am your host, Derek Dombeck, and today our discussion is going to be something that's near and dear to my heart, which is vision and more so than just vision, but really talking about the ups and downs of business, the ins and outs. And my guest, Alan Underwood, he's been through a lot of ups and downs, but he's also got some incredible things going on right now. And part of that is he does coach and mentor people in these different aspects of, scaling your business and growing, but not losing sight of who you are and what you really truly want. So, with that in mind, with Alan coming up here, again, I always like to extend the invitation. If there's something that I can do to help you, if that's just a conversation about your vision, feel free to reach out to me. The generationsofwealth.com website, you can get us there, but derekdombeck.com, shoot me an email, derek@globalgow.com. So that's it for the introductions. Let's bring on Alan Underwood. And here he is, as promised, Mr. Alan Underwood. Alan, thank you so much for giving us some of your precious time to the Generations of Wealth show.
Derek, thank you. What an honor to spend a few minutes with you today and hopefully serve up some great ideas and transformational content for your audience.
Well, I know that you and I have a lot in common as far as I think our mindset. But to start with, why don't you just tell everybody about yourself and we're just going to dive into a little bit of your background and your story, and then get to the good stuff.
Sounds great. I am Alan Underwood. I'm a high performance coach. I'm a real estate investor and developer, a fund manager. I'm a keynote speaker, and passionately, I'm a pilot who also happens to get to use my love for aviation in a very meaningful way as the wing leader of Angel Flight West. Like many of your listeners, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm an entrepreneur who's had some big wins. I've also had some painful losses along the way. And now, my purpose is to help other people navigate both the big wins and the big losses that they encounter. A few years ago, I co-founded the Momentum Capital Group, where we help investors build wealth through really innovative niche strategy developing AUs in San Diego. And my story, I guess my claim to fame, if you will, is that my life has completely changed really in just the last 5 years or so. Leading up to that, I lost both of my in-laws and my dad in a very short amount of time. In 2 years, walked away from a $16 million a year business to save my life. And, really through prayer and coaching and contribution and a whole lot of work, I've had to rebuild everything in the last 5 years. So those are the people that I love to speak with, that I love to help. Hopefully we find a few of those on your show where they're looking for, hope that life can be a little bit better. They're looking for ways to grow and improve and build the life and legacy that they dream of. And outside of that, my vision for me is, pretty simple. It's on the wall, and I know yours is behind you, but mine is to do as much as I can for as long as I can, for as many as I can, and in an airplane if I can. So with that, I'll throw it back over to you and look forward to seeing where this conversation goes.
My regular listeners know I've had my ups and downs, and the part that has always stood out to me is not the self-made business owners that were handed something and they grew it. I've always just appreciated the people that started with little or nothing, grew it up. Maybe they had some downfalls, maybe they didn't. And that's not to say if somebody inherited a business that they're not successful, don't deserve it. But um, when you grow it and then if you do lose it, I feel like you appreciate it more. But what I've always said is they can literally take everything away from me, but short of a brain injury, they can't take my experience and what's between my ears. So the rebound can be much faster, better, um, but that doesn't necessarily mean bigger in my mind, right? And that was one of the things that
Yeah.
I've struggled with my vision over the years was I really living my vision or was I just trying to keep up with somebody else's vision for me, right?
So true.
Um,
Yeah.
so what kind of led you to really want to be more of the coach or the to help people like you do now?
Well, the beginning of that was I hired a coach a year ago. A shout out to my coach, my friend, a mentor, an example in a lot of ways, Coach Trevor McGregor. Um, he saw more in me than what I could see in myself at the time and has encouraged me to share that. And has led to a really joyful discovery. Really something I realized I've been doing it my entire life was helping other people, you know, buy businesses, invest, improve their lives. It just wasn't something maybe that was programmed as well or as intentional as it has become, but I've just discovered a real joy for that. There's some of the work that I've done over the last couple of years has been discovering, what my core values are, what motivates me on a deeper level than just adding zeros to the balance sheet. And the highest core value that I have is to make a difference. And so that shows up for me now as a keynote speaker and as a coach and volunteering for nonprofits, including Angel Flight West. So really for me, it was that going through the process of being coached and having somebody help me reach a higher level than I could have on my own.
So how do you start with somebody? They come to you with and I'm not projecting, I'm assuming that they come to you with these grand ideas that you're going to coach them into this huge business, maybe, if they're trying to scale. But in my experience, scaling doesn't always mean more profitability. It doesn't always mean that you have the schedule that you want. Oftentimes you don't have the schedule you want. How do you balance your profit potential versus your purpose?
Yeah, really great question. Um, I love something that Ed Milet says often. He says, "You're most qualified to help the person that you were 5 years ago." And 5 years ago, I was a guy that had experienced a tremendous amount of success. I built an eight-figure business. But that guy was also sitting in the cab of his pickup truck looking at a handgun and wanting to end his life. And so success and happiness are not directly correlated. And in fact, there's a lot of studies that show that some of the most successful people in the world are the least happy. And that's really where I feel my calling and purpose is. I work with a wide range of different people. A man who's been a 21-year career at one of the largest banks in the world and has risen to the highest levels in that organization. And all you can think about is, I want to get out of here because it's not what I'm doing, what I've always been doing, but it's not what I want to do. Working with a very successful pediatric dentist who's looking to sell the practice and pursue flight training for young women. And so the commonality is people, I love what you said about sometimes you're chasing someone else's dream. And certainly for me, that was true growing up. What my dad and my grandpa taught me was that the way that you become successful is you show up early, stay late, and you work harder than everybody else. And that was the pattern that I pursued for the first 20 years of my professional life. Is I showed up early, I stayed late, and I just outworked everybody. And they weren't wrong. That consistent effort over time led to some tremendous success. It also led to a very hollow existence, which, had I taken the very next step in that existence, would have meant that I'm not here today. And and so the commonality with everybody that I work with, that I help, isn't necessarily that I want to grow my business, it's that I want to improve my life. Now, sometimes that correlates with growing a business. I certainly have clients where that's the primary focus. But if you're doing that without improving someone's life, the end result is not going to be a good one. And so the first step in that is, you know, the only transformation is only possible when you start with truth. And so the first step in the process that I have is identity. Let's figure out who you are today. What are the ideas, the things that you were taught, the things that you learned as a child that led you to this place? How did you become who you are? And the next step is vision, is who do you want to become, and what are the differences between what that vision is and who you are today? And then the third step is, once we've clarified the vision and identified the consistent effort that it's going to require to move in that direction, is let's push that vision out further and what you want your legacy to look like. And legacy is very different from occupation. It's very different from income. I was at the funeral for a good friend of mine a couple of months ago, and not surprisingly, none of his family or friends talked about how much money he had earned. He was a very successful attorney. They didn't talk about how many cases he'd won or how many times he'd been in front of the Supreme Court. What they talked about was him taking the time to go get a donut with his kids, or taking the time to go thrift shopping because his daughters enjoyed it, or mowing his neighbor's lawn. And so it was the impact that he left in the world, not the income that he earned. And that's really where, if I can, leave a mark in the world, it would be that I left people better than I found them, not necessarily, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're more wealthy than when I found them, although that usually is true also.
Well, I relate to that a lot, and part of the challenge that I found after coaching people and specifically in vision is oftentimes you figure out your vision and you realize that maybe the people in your life aren't the ones that should be in your life. And that can be family members, friends, business partners, spouses. I mean, it can really it can be a double-edged sword. Um, and I will just, from my own personal experience, I had a business partner for 10 years. We parted ways, amicably, but our visions weren't in alignment anymore. And so when we parted ways, that was a vision element, but it wasn't something that we really ever thought would happen prior to that. And to me, the lesson there is your vision is and should constantly be evolving.
Yes. And that should be intentional. And this time of year is a great time of year to be talking about vision. Most people, get to January 1st and they start making New Year's resolutions. I just spent probably 20 or 30 hours this last weekend working on my personal vision for 2026 and beyond. And that's something that I do annually. I check in with myself. I carve out a day every month where there's nothing else on the calendar. I call that my looking back and looking forward day, where I look back to acknowledge how far I've come, reach out in gratitude to the people that have been a part of the last 30 days of my life. Then also look forward at the next 30 and say, okay, what are the little teeny steps towards this big vision that I have that I need to take this month to realize it. So I think regularly adjusting course when necessary and checking in with your vision is as important as having a vision.
Well, and the part that I caught there is so many people don't go back and realize or appreciate or even I'm at a loss of words right now, but um, take in and celebrate their wins, right? And I think that's a huge mistake because vision ultimately, from what I've seen and the people I've worked with, it usually starts out as things. You know, people want stuff. Maybe it's the house, the vacations, the cars, more money, or whatever. But after you start achieving those goals, they're pretty hollow, and then your vision kind of starts going more towards who can I help? How can I help? And for me, at least, that's more meaning. It's one of the main reasons I do this show. It's just the way that I can connect listeners to really incredible guests, and people have done this for me over the years, and now I get to do it too. So,
I love that.
so you celebrate your wins. You reach out in gratitude. I actually wrote this down while you were saying it because it's something that I've gotten away from, and I need to do. I need to go
Mhm.
back to, which is always really awesome when you're having these conversations. Iron sharpens iron. You know, the little things of just that little one word or one phrase that you said that changes a lot for me because it was a reminder, and we all need those reminders. We can all rest on our laurels. We can all get comfortable pretty easily.
That's so true. And I love the saying that when you have gratitude, you don't have a problem, and that gratitude is the solution to any problem. My coach says that any problem is a problem of perspective. And I'll share a story where that really became clear for me. So, as part of my vision at the beginning of last year was to participate in a bodybuilding competition, a body transformation challenge. And the end of that was a couple of weeks of very restricted calorie intake, a lot of cardio. And what I didn't know going into that was that under those conditions, it becomes difficult for your brain to produce things that are important, like dopamine and serotonin, and the things that help you to feel happy. Your brain just stops doing because it doesn't have the energy. And I found myself feeling pretty low and really having to tap back into intentional practices of gratitude and meditation. And in the middle of doing that one day, I got a phone call from my friend Lorraine. And Lorraine, 12 or 13 years ago, lost her daughter to childhood cancer, and then within a few months, lost her husband to cancer. And she took that pain and turned it into a really powerful purpose. She now helps 1,200 to 1,500 kids every year with the battle with childhood cancer. She does that in a variety of ways, but because of the work that I do with Angel Flight West, we have a connection. And she called and she was at Phoenix Children's Hospital with a family whose 16-year-old daughter was at the point of being put on hospice. I have a 16-year-old daughter, and I realized right away that here I was having this pity party. Oh, this is so hard and whatever. And that conversation, instantly, what she was asking me to do is this girl had always wanted to go flying, and she wanted to know if I could take her flying before she passed. And, obviously the answer to that question is yes. Anytime, anywhere, I'll clear my schedule, we'll go do it. But the real education I got from that experience was that here I was dealing with a problem of perspective where if I had just taken a little bit of time to look at the conditions that were leading me to feel unhappy or whatever down in this moment, I realized I put myself in that situation. I could just as easily have taken myself out of it. But this family had not put themselves in this situation. This was something that was forced upon them. And what I was seeing at that time as a problem really wasn't a problem. It was a short-term inconvenience lack of calories that could be changed very quickly. They were dealing with a real life problem. And, so having an intentional gratitude practice on a regular basis sure helps to snap me back into the right perspective of, what are really challenges in life. And there's so much that we all have to be grateful for, which it was really great that we're doing this. We're recording right before Thanksgiving. What a great conversation to have on gratitude.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and this isn't something that I was introduced to until 7 or 8 years ago, and I've been in business for over 2 decades. And I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's driven home enough to business owners. Like there's so much stress that can be built up in keeping up with the Joneses, living somebody else's vision, right? Like I would go back to 2003 when I first started, and everybody that was selling any kind of real estate information was saying, "Yep, you just have to get 100 rental doors, make $100 per door, $10,000 a week, and your life is great." Well, what if I don't want to manage 100 rental doors? What if I don't want like nobody talks about vision. It's all about you're going to make 10 grand a month passively. And there's nothing passive about managing 100 rental units at all. But that's what everybody sells, right? They sell the big dream of make this money. And here we are a couple decades later, $10,000 a month doesn't hardly keep people. I mean, that's barely out of poverty level in many, many regions of the country, right?
Yeah.
So the perspective is everything. And um, when you're working with your clients or just looking at anything for yourself, um, how do you shift your mindset, right? How do you focus on things that are going to stay positive to get you that long-term success?
Yeah, really great question. And one that I had to learn. And now, like I said, I'm helping the guy that I was 5 years ago. So, I think the first step in in moving in that direction and the framework that I use is number one, just being really clear on what you want. We can all walk into the restaurant of life, open the menu, and order what we want. Most people don't have the courage to say, what I really want is the T-bone steak, not the chicken. Um, but getting really clear on exactly what it is that you want, that's way more important than how am I going to do it? Because once you're clear on what you want, you can break down the how into very small pieces. The next thing is aligning your identity with that vision. Um, it's very true that you won't outperform your identity. And so you have to begin to become that person at the end of that vision. I was speaking with my health coach earlier today, and he asked what had helped me to be successful over the last year preparing for this bodybuilding competition. And what I told him is that I have a picture on my wall, on my vision board of what I wanted to look like. And I identified in advance, what do I want to look like? What are the daily choices that I need to make in order for that to happen? And how am I going to feel about that? I mentally imagined myself giving myself a high five every time I walked out of the gym because I wanted that feeling of success, that dopamine hit. I said, so when it was hard, I just had to look back to that picture and say, you know what, I've already decided who I'm going to become. I just have to live in alignment with that decision. And so, there's really the process is easy, and it's who am I, or I am is the statement. I choose and I feel, and that's the part that a lot of people don't add to. They get the vision. Who am I going to be? They identify the choices, but you can also decide how you're going to feel about it. And everything that we do in a life is to have a feeling. We buy a business, we invest in something because we want the feeling of success. We enter a relationship because we want the feeling of being loved or whatever it is. I've just come to realize that I can decide how I'm going to feel about it. And that way my brain isn't trying to figure out what I'm going to feel. I'm going to feel happy and grateful to be alive every time I step out of bed. Well, now my brain knows, okay, well, when I wake up, I'm going to be happy and I'm going to be grateful to be alive. That's pre-programmed. And the last part of that is what we talked about earlier is gratitude, just saying thank you. And that can happen every single day. You can go through that process in 5 minutes. Who am I going to be today? What are the choices that I need to make? How am I going to feel about it? What can I be grateful for? And in 5 minutes, you can change the trajectory of your life, which ultimately, looking at the background behind you can change generations.
Yeah, it really can. And the part that has helped me a lot is to see what it's done for others that not that I'm taking any credit. I introduced them to something just like I was introduced to something. But then staying in communication with people, like for some, it works good to have accountability partners. For others, it's just maybe a yearly check-in or a 6-month check-in or whatever. But I have really, especially in the last 7 or 8 years, focused on staying away from anything negative. I don't watch
Mhm.
the news. I mean, I'll watch financial news, maybe, but I don't I don't want the negativity around me. And inevitably, if you focus on that, that's what you're going to have in your life. And it's not,
Absolutely.
it's not always easy, but like you said, if that's your intentions and you're intentional about it, our mantra here, live your vision, love your life. That doesn't mean that every day you get to live your vision. It doesn't mean every day you love your life, but damn it, that's the goal every day, you know?
Yeah, I love that. And it's really true. Your body will look like what you eat, right? If you eat healthy, if you exercise, your body will change to look exactly like what you're putting into it. Your attitude, your thoughts, your emotions are the same thing with what you put into your brain. And the most successful people, the top performers in the world, are very careful about what they put into their mind. Um, I am very careful, about it. I was just thinking today, several years ago, I would listen to music or to the radio or whatever as I was driving to work, and that's fine. There's a good place for good music. But every morning now, every day, the primary playlist of my life are motivational speeches or biographies of successful people. And I've just included a very high filter for what I allow to come into my brain because I know that that's going to come out of my life at some point. So I want to be intentional with that. So I love that that's high on your priorities as well.
Absolutely. Well, Alan, this is a very tough question. My regulars know it's coming. What is one question I should have asked you that I didn't? And it can be about anything.
What is one question that you should have asked me, but you haven't asked me? It seems like I get that question from potential investors a lot also. What do I need to know that I haven't asked you? Um, you know, here's how I'll respond to that is what is the secret to getting everything that you want in life? That's what you should have asked me.
What is the secret to getting everything you want in life? And what is your answer if that was the question?
So 5 years ago, I was sitting with a group of men in Florida and sharing my goals. And one of the men at that table, his name's Mike, said, Alan, all these goals are great. All of this will come to you if you can respond to this question. I said, okay. And he said, on a scale of 0 to 5, how much do you love yourself? I said, well, having been at the point of suicide not that long ago, I know what 0 looks like. I'm probably at about a 2. And he said, when you learn to go from a 2 to a 5, everything that you want in life will come to you. And that sparked two questions in my mind. Question number one is, okay, why is that true? And the second question was, how do I do it? To my first question, why is that true? What Mike said was that the number one thing in this world that everybody wants is to feel loved. And when you learn to love yourself to the point that it just overflows, other people will sense that and they'll come to you for whatever it is that you're offering. Coaching, investing, whatever widget you're selling, and they will think that they're coming to you for that thing. What they're really coming to you for is that you've got enough love for yourself that you can share it with other people. I thought, okay, I can accept that. And then the next thing that he asked was, or that I asked was, how do you do it? And he said, I have no idea. That's what you have to figure out for yourself. And the journey of learning how to answer that question has completely changed my life. Learning how to forgive myself, love myself, give myself grace when I make mistakes, has been the most important lesson that I've learned in the last 5 years, and maybe in the last 49 years of my life. And, if you haven't answered that question for yourself, or you feel like you're hovering somewhere between a 0 and a 4, I would just encourage you to explore that. I certainly can share that what that journey looked like for me, but it may not look the same for you, Derek. It may not look the same for your listeners, but it's a journey worth pursuing and not something that is taught in school or usually anywhere else. We just don't get that, but one that I think everybody has to take at some point in learning how to love, accept, and forgive themselves.
I wish there was a path where this was a curriculum that was introduced to younger people. But the reality is, I don't think, speaking from my own experience, I don't think you can force somebody to want to learn this. We all hit this, if we ever hit it, many don't, but when those of us that do hit it, we find the answers is because we were looking for answers. And I know when I was first introduced to from my coach and mentor, figuring out what I wanted my life to look like, I was a pain in the ass for at least a year and a half. I agreed that this was something I wanted to do. I agreed that I would do it. I didn't actually take the steps. And then when I took the steps and embraced it, things started changing very quickly. Very, very quickly. And then it was that look back saying, well, why didn't I know this earlier in life? I wasn't ready to know it earlier in life. No, it
So
wasn't
true.
introduced to me, but even if it was introduced to me, I may not have even recognized it or took action on it because I wasn't ready to see it.
Yeah, that's really important. Everything in life, I think, happens for us, not to us. And there are times and seasons, and we learn lessons differently. For me, I had to learn this lesson, after I was 40. Hopefully, for some other people, it happens earlier. I've now hired coaches for my teenage kids to help start them on this journey because
Mhm.
I think it's so important that they develop that earlier in life rather than be forced into it later in life. So I also think exposing people to the idea that you can learn how to love yourself. And it's the same, Derek, as investing, right? You can think about investing, you can want to invest, you can want to buy a rental property, you can underwrite, you can go to all the conferences, but until you actually take the first step and do something about either making a passive investment, purchasing a property, whatever that first step is for you, you can remain stuck in that place of wanting to for a long time. But the real growth is going to happen as soon as you just take that first step. And that first deal doesn't even have to be a good one. It could be the worst deal that you ever make. But making that first step moves you from someone who's thinking about it to someone who's doing it. And that is the hardest step. Once you become a doer, you can just continue doing.
Yeah, and once you're doing what seemed impossible at the beginning becomes ordinary, and then it's just like I was having a conversation this week. I had a real estate closing, and there was a fairly large proceeds check or wire. Um, I didn't even I didn't even flinch. It was just it's part of inventory. Inventory needs to move. That piece of inventory is now gone. That money comes into the account. That money goes to cover overhead, right? Like what I would have been 20 years ago, I would have taken a vacation. I would have celebrated. I would have been like over the moon. Now it's just another day. And that goes back to the whole taking a moment to, be appreciative and give gratitude and think about the successes. That's probably why that hit me when you said it today, because I that literally just happened yesterday. So it's
We
true.
so rarely celebrate those wins, right? We forget to celebrate because it becomes normal, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't celebrate it, right? And that's actually a question I was discussing over dinner this last week with a friend was when was the last time you took time to celebrate a victory? And he was like, I don't know. It's been a
Mhm.
while. Like, well, we need to change that. How are we going to celebrate the next wins? Because, we crave that, right? Like, we need those personal celebrations, but we don't give ourselves permission to do that very often.
You are 100% correct. Well, Alan, again, I knew this would be an easy conversation for us based on our backgrounds, but I truly appreciate your insights and your appreciation or your ability to be open and vulnerable and talk about your journey.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of my story, and hopefully it's been helpful for somebody who's listening.
Well, anybody that is listening, go back and listen to it again because everything that we were talking about, it sounds very simple, and in theory it is, but you have to take that action or nothing will change.
So true.
Well, we'll wrap it up here, Alan. Thank you again. And for those of you listening, regular listeners, thanks for coming back. And you hear this every show. Please do everything you can to help us spread the message for the generations of wealth. Send this show to people you know. Give us all the love and attention on social media anywhere you can. And until the next show, go out there and live your vision and love your life. See ya.